as a group that particularly stayed in my brain, and I like the songs, and I like the voice, having heard the songs again and listened to them. But the reason I chose him actually was because of his a solo album I heard by him, which he'd done more recently with Nick Davis, in fact, which he'd done a 2 or 3 years ago, which has never come out. But I just heard some tracks on it. We were looking for vocalists. I thought he had a good voice, and one of the people came down. And what his voice actually is a little bit, it's got sort of, it's a bit like mine, but just a lot better. Which is, he can kind of do all the things that I kind of want to be able to do, and he's got a few sort of manic touches which I quite like. And the manic sort of that little sort of edge is quite well. You see it quite well on the first track, which is kind of a slightly more hysterical quality the voice is required. So it's more of a, it's more of an opening sort of type track, I suppose. Second track's called Walls of Sound, which is is exactly opposite to what the title suggests. Actually, it's a romantic sort of what they used to call rocker ballad, I think, mid-tempo thing, sort of crowded house sort of type thing. It's a group I admire a lot, and more that sort of feel, and very much a melody and a romantic lyric. And so then the third track, we'll go through. The third track is the first single, Only 17, which is a very sort of much more of a programmed track than any of the others. It's tells the sort of tale of a girl who gets involved in sort of things perhaps she shouldn't get involved in. But she comes from a very sort of straight middle class background, but she has a sort of like a second side where she kind of does all these naughty things, and you're not quite sure whether it's going to bring her down or not really. The song probably ends on an optimistic note. We've done a video for that, which is a sort of animated video, which sort of illustrates it quite well. So we'll illustrate two worlds, the sort of the good and the bad, if you like. It's slightly different from perhaps things I've done in the past. Chordally, it's quite, it goes all over the place actually. It's surprisingly sort of, harmonically, it's quite an interesting song. But it sounds deceptively simple because of the nature of the rhythm, which is sort of, to say, programmed. And virtually everything on it, in fact, there's virtually no, and I played everything on that track apart. There's a little bit of guitar, and it's all the drums, bass, everything is like that. And it gives it sort of quite a sort of slightly different character. I think it sounds quite contemporary, but I think because of the nature of the chords and everything, it takes it somewhere slightly different. It's got quite a strong melody, I think. It's whether it'll appeal sort of on a wide enough level to introduce anyone else to what I do or not, I just don't know. It's very difficult to tell with these things. So much of it is dependent on the few radio producers' responses and things like that. It's not totally straightforward. That's the problem. I mean, it's not like kind of say, hey, it's not like a single or anything. It's just, but it might intrigue some people.
Was it chosen as a single by yourself, or?
I always wanted it to be a single. This is the first time in my whole career where my choice for a single has actually coincided with anybody else's. So whether that's good or bad, I don't know, since my choice of singles is normally pretty poor. But I think when we were working on it, we had a sort of feel that it just had a sort of thing about it. When we played it to people, it was the one that everyone sort of went for. Probably because it sounded good at an instrumental stage. That's one reason before it had any vocals on it. So there's a tendency to sort of think of it that way. Originally, it was just it developed out of I just improvised on I had this little idea with just a sound with an echo and just a result, which I actually got when we were doing the last doing We Can't Dance, and I sort of got a little thing going with it then, and Mike liked it a lot, but Phil wasn't very excited, so we didn't develop it at that point. And what I did was I just took the idea. I didn't actually use any of the bits that I'd used when we'd done it with Genesis, and just improvised. And I had about a 20-minute improvisation on this thing, and which sounded pretty good, just like that. Actually flowed. I tied it up, got rid of a few of the bum notes, and then what I did was I selected a few bits and pieces out of it to sort of make a kind of song out of it, and a bit of repetition, some bits repeated, sort of like one after the other bits just uses the verse, chorus, and things like that. So you get one or two bits where the lengths are slightly strange because I sort of took the whole bit as a sort of slab, and used it like that. And it's a sort of new, slightly different way for me to do it actually. And I wanted to try and get the essence of what the improvisation had, which was a kind of like continuous sort of flowing feel, but nevertheless make it musically more interesting and make more of a song out of it. And so that's the result. And I'm pretty pleased. But it's kind of different from everything else in the album. So if you hear that track and think, you may like it, you may not like it. The fourth track is called The Serpent Said, which is a sort of heavy thing. Owes a little bit to sort of, I've always liked sort of sort of slow, heavy tracks, you know, sort of Squonk vein, I suppose. Kashmir by Led Zeppelin was always a big favourite of mine back in those days, and I suppose it's got a little bit of that in terms of just the chord structure and things, but it goes a bit further than that. And it's probably what you might call it's quite a traditional sort of song of mine. And Tony Smith, my manager, said, you know, when I think of Tony, I think of it's the sort of song I think of, you know. Which is funny, really, because I think it's a sort of more delicate, more beautiful thing, but this is sort of heavier, kind of ponderous. But you know, it's a sort of song about temptation. I think it's sort of probably about the lottery, really. Actually, it's about that kind of thing. It's about the effect of, you know, you want to win all that money, you know, but if you did, what would it be like, and things like that. So, but it's not specifically about that. But I did write it about the time when that was sort of coming to the fore, and I think it's sort of got a bit of that in it. Fifth track is called "Never Let Me Know," which is a sort of which is another sort of romantic song, but it's a sort of song about love going wrong, as opposed to the other one, which is about love going right. And sort of, it's a sort of probably the second most complicated track in some ways. It has quite an extended instrumental middle, which goes through a few changes, but it's definitely sort of a sort of downer song, I suppose. I don't want to sort of talk much more about it, really. It's one of my favourites, actually. I think it sort of speaks for itself, but then you haven't heard it, so I can't doesn't really help very much, that, does it? Slow, a little bit more bluesy, and it ends on a slightly more optimistic note than it starts out on. I think what's next on this album? Oh, Charity Balls is the next one, which is probably the simplest track on the album, actually, which is a very just a repeated little riff sort of thing. It's built on one idea, but the lyric is quite fun. It's sort of about, you know, it's all the sort of stuff that's been in the news, I suppose, about sort of sleaze, you know, Tory stuff. But it's not just related to politicians. It's everybody's got sort of something to hide type thing. And the sort of charity balls, obviously, sort of pun on the word balls. Very subtle, but it kind of it's sort of the most humorous. Well, there are two humorous lyrics. This is one of them, and it kind of someone stopped. That was you, there, wasn't it? What was the tape stopping? It's
no, it was.
No, right. It's what more can I say about it, really? It was actually when I was writing the stuff. It was always to me sort of a bit of a B idea. I didn't think it was going to go very far. And when we started sort of doing it in the studio, you know, it started sounding quite good, and put a few little things on it, drums on it. And then when Jack came in to sing it, he said this is one of his favourite things, you know. And I started thinking a bit differently about it, actually. And you know, it's one of those things that sort of took off a bit more. Because sometimes when you're writing things, you think this is going to be fantastic, and it doesn't turn out too good. And other things you think this is throwaway. We've done this in the past. You know, I can't dance a real throwaway thing when we're writing it, you know, and yet it turned out good. It's often like that. Some things sort of really, you know, do develop and some things don't. And that's what it did. So after that, the next one is a song called "Something to Live For," which is in 7/4 time, which I haven't done for quite a long time, actually. And what was quite fun to do it with, I've never really done 7 with a drum machine before, and it was just sort of set up what was a good, you know, good drum box rhythm going in 7 time, and I just sort of improvised on it. And I got 3 very distinct ideas on it, where the sort of each one sort of used the 7 in a different kind of way, so it turned it around. And I was quite pretty excited by it, actually. It's kind of really sort of, you get some quite. Well, the problem was when you're writing with a real drummer, you know, the problem is they get bored after a while. You know, you sort of try to say, please just keep playing the same thing for hours and hours, and then they say, oh, that, you know. So, well, the great thing about drum machines is they're just relentless. They'll go on and on playing the same thing forever, and you can improvise. And I mean, I can, you know, 4 or 5 hours on one thing. It doesn't worry me too much. So you carry on just playing on it, and then you do develop these ideas, and you get little things. And the great thing again when you're using the computer and stuff is that you can sort of try. You know, you can do improvisations, you can slot bits together, cut them together, and see how they sound and things, which I quite like. And so that sort of develops out of that, really. And the way the drum box is actually one drum box rhythm all the way through. The real drums come in quite early on, so they're quite a big feature, and actually the drumming is very good on it. But it actually sounds like the drum box rhythm changes. It doesn't sound like the same all the way through because you get different emphasis all the way through it because of the way that it interferes with the other beats. the meaning of the song is pretty much just the title tells you it really, something to live for. It's a sort of like a, when everyone's kind of criticising what you do in any field, you just got to sort of keep doing it, really, one way or the other, believe in what you're doing, I suppose. Next track is called A Piece of You. Both this track and the one after it called which is Strictly Incognito, which is the sort of title track, I suppose. Both these lyrics were written by Jack, and the first one is a sort of photographer, really, and how the interviewer is now looking at his tape machine to check whether it's actually taped, which is
it's his function.
Good. And
the interviewer isn't.
Yes, the interviewee is watching the interviewer. What was I saying about? This is a photographer, and the idea that when you take a picture, that you capture a little bit of the person, a piece of you. It's a nice lyric, and I think the great thing about having something about singers singing their own lyrics, that they always seem to get their tongues around it just that little bit better, I think, which I think is unfortunate, but that's the way it is. The song, it's quite a simple song, probably relating perhaps slightly more to some of the stuff, more recent Genesis stuff, sort of things like that. Well, the verse part of it perhaps relates more to things like Hole in My Heart, something like that. But then it goes into an sort of extended middle section that gets bigger. I couldn't stop myself. I can't try to keep it kind of tight. Something goes like this, and it comes back to the simple stuff at the end. But I think it's an effective song, actually. I like it all, I suppose. That's what I to say. Then the next track, Strictly Incognito, is which again is that Jack wrote the lyric for. It's a much more sort of up-tempo kind of thing. And it's sort of the other sort of humorous track, I suppose. It tells the story, in fact, which is supposed to be based on a true story, where this guy was had up for rape in America. No, not rape, no, for having sex with an underage girl, because it was a woman with multiple personas, and one of her personas was 14 years old. And he actually went to jail, I think, for 10 years.
I think I remember reading something about something strange.
It's a sort of cautionary tale. It says you should, watch.
Check out how many personas that people.
That's right. So don't sort of, so the last lines is, if your waitress looks you right in the eye, you just sort of got to watch out. Things. So it's quite funny, and I think it works quite well, because I think it's quite a complicated idea, and it comes across in the lyric quite well. And since the lyric was written after the music, it's surprising how it all sort of fits together quite nicely. So that's them, and then the final piece is this 18-minute opus, where sort of I feel the rest of the album I sort of kept myself pretty well in check, and then this one I just I'm going for it, let it all sort of come out. So it starts off with a sort of 3 or 4 minute kind of, about 2 or 3 minutes piano introduction, which is sort of just playing piano with non-repeating thing, and then it develops into a song. About 4 or 5 minutes song, which is fairly concise, which has got sort of a drum box based thing, drum machine, and the song sort of tells a story about. It's not a story. It's the idea that the first part where the song is a very sort of optimistic thing. Is how people sort of you arrive at a point where everything seems fantastic. Having sort of tried and strived, you find yourself somewhere. It's sort of. Be a political situation, it could be a person's life, doesn't really matter, I kept it very general. You get to a point, South Africa would be a good example, where they've strived and things have been awful, and then suddenly you've got a situation where it all seems fantastic. And then as the song progresses, you get the next bit of vocal in it. There's a sort of questioning moment when, can it stay like this? And then the final part is when it's sort of definitely not going right, and things are not right again, and how do you have the will to carry on? That's the idea of it. So there's also repeated themes and things in it. So there's a sort of soft theme that comes just after the first verse, which is kind of like the first hint, if you like, of things could go wrong, but done very quietly. And then at the end, it comes back as a sort of big kind of guitar solo, and the sort of major theme of the song, I suppose. You sort of left that becoming sort of the dominant feature, if you like. It was a chance to introduce a bit of perhaps what I haven't had on the last couple of albums of my own, a sort of drama, a bit of big drama, so that when the theme comes back, the second last lot of vocal comes back, there's quite a sort of intense and sort of moody kind of feel to it, with a lot of power, and then going into the guitar solo, which is got more. I think if it relates perhaps of all sort of earlier songs was. I don't know. It's got a touches, I suppose, of the fifth because of the nature of the theme thing that's repeated, soft and loud, and some other aspects, I suppose, from a little bit of tonight, I suppose, from the first part. And there's things of there are. It's a definite Genesis-y kind of thing. I think. But there's a lot of the stuff in between is sort of non-repetitive. I just it's like little. Some bits were just piano improvisations that I just took absolutely as I played them. Actually, sort of learned how I played them, and then played them again into the things. I just thought they worked nicely. Sometimes it's got quite nice that sort of thing. Sort of, there's quite a lot. It's the first time also that I've used kind of, I suppose, real piano on a solo album for quite a while. The problem is, you see, with the computers and tape machine and everything, computers and stuff, you have a terrible tendency to sort of want to use that, because at home it means I get the whole thing down, so I tend to use the samples and everything. And then there's a tendency just to start quantizing, and so you get the effect where it's a little bit artificial, like on the last album I used on Selected by Surprise, where I ended up playing into the computer, and then of course you can't stop yourself getting it perfectly in time and everything, and I think it loses something for that, and it'd be nice if one could leave it. And what I'm fortunately, by the time I got into doing this album, the technology got into the stage where you can combine the computer with sort of real recorded sounds as well, that you can use them almost like they are computer sort of files and things. And so the combination, I could do that with this. I could actually play the real piano into the thing, record it like that, and use it just like it was, like it was on the computer in the other way. And it gives a totally different feel. I think when people hear it, you'll say, "Well, this is real piano." You can tell it's real piano. It's really me playing it, and it's not totally 100%. It's not totally in time, which is half the sort of charm, I think, of the person playing. Is it's sort of the things that aren't perfect, and that sort of forms the basis of the whole thing. Everything is piano based, but the piano gets quite lost in some bits potentially.
So this last track, is it mostly instrumental?
I suppose it is. It's got. It's probably about 40% vocal or 30% vocal. I think there's a lot of instrumental in it actually, but it's got two sort of big vocal sections and then one little bit as well in the middle. Write the lyrics out. The lyrics aren't as long, in fact, as they are on a 4-minute track, but then it's a bit slower in places as well. But
did you say when you was doing this particular tune as well that this is going to be about 20 minutes, I'm going for it, or did it just seem to expand?
Well, it was a bit like I had these ideas. I had a few ideas which just wouldn't contain themselves, and I just.
Because it's a long song by any standard on any album.
Long, and I put it at the end because it means that people who want to get there will get to it, and will hopefully will like it and get that far. But it's not something that you're not going to, because people are much more resistant to long music nowadays. Actually, even people who think they aren't are actually, because there's something about it seems to be sort of more. So it is more self-indulgent, there's not about it, but it gives you a chance to explore certain ideas, and because there's some bits are kind of, the song itself you could take out and would stand up perfectly well on its own, the 4-minute song in the middle. But I did sit down and I wanted to try and write something longer that could include some of these other bits and pieces. I also felt that it was time to try something a little bit more, something. If you do a longer thing, it just makes you do things you wouldn't do otherwise, because you kind of got to. You're not struck by the same
restricting.
Yeah, that's it. It's like trying to write sonnets all your life. You can't just write sonnets. And if you want to write a sort of epic poem, it's twice a year after you do. And just sort of. And I had this theme, which was good. Which again, it developed out of a little idea that I had just a 1-2 bar melodic phrase that I got when I was doing the We Can't Dance album. Again, which never got used, although everybody liked it. We just never used it. And so I developed that. Had it in front of it. A lot after it and stuff, and made it into a big theme. So in fact, for this particular, although on the album, I'll go on to Karen talking about sort of the people playing on it, I suppose, might as well. You probably asked me anyhow.
I was going to,
yeah. Well, I can tell you then. How about it? Anticipating your question. No, well, Jack is a guitarist as much as he's a singer, really. So he plays most of the guitar on the album. But there were a couple of bits and pieces, and he would be the first to admit he's not really a lead guitarist. And I knew on this thing, so I wanted a proper lead solo. And so I got Daryl to come down and do that. And while he was down, he did this other song, Walls of Sound, which I wanted a strumming guitar throughout it. And to be honest, the chords move around so fast that you've got to be very technically good just to to do it that quickly. And I mean, Jack's a good guitarist, but he's not sort of, you know, he does move around the chords. It's easy on a keyboard because they sort of slip and they look normal, but you put on a guitar and it's sort of these shapes, you know. And even Darryl was kind of laughing as he plays. You know? And but it gives a nice feel. You know? Again, that's I said, I want that sort of crowded house type feel, and I just really love that sort of way they just have acoustic things sometimes. You know? And so I wanted a bit of that in. So Darryl played guitar just on the Water Sound and on the guitar solo in Unreleased, which is the last track. And the other major players, obviously there's John Robinson, who plays drums throughout. He's probably best known for his drumming on the Steve Winwood album back in the High Life. You know, some High Life and stuff, which I think I always felt was a great piece of drumming. But he's American session drummer. I was originally going to use Vinnie Colaiuta like I did on the last album, but he was sort of out with Sting all the time, and it just didn't work out. You know, kept coming, and then he couldn't come and everything. So in the end, we decided we'd do some tracks with John and wait for Vinnie when he was ready. But as it turned out, got John over, and he was just so good. He was just a different kind of thing, because Vinnie's a very great sort of intricate drummer, very good. He's very musical and does little things, and particularly with odd time signatures, he's very good at sort of just making it all sound so natural. If you listen to Sting's, I'm sure you have done Sting's last album. I mean, there's so many songs from funny signatures in which you'd never guess. They just sound so natural, and that's a lot down to a drummer of his quality, I think. Whereas John is a more solid kind of drummer, but he's just got a great feel, and he really kind of, you know, and on this album I think it works really well. The one track he had any trouble with at all was the one in 7, in fact, but once you got that, he was so determined to get it right too. He said he kept thinking he was ex-wife, you know, the drum as hard as he could, you know. And it ended up being probably the best of all the drum performances, because he actually really went for it, whereas the rest of it he found almost too easy. You know, you go in there, you hear the song once, and you just play it. You know. You've got to do something more than that, you know, paying you all this money. But he's a really good drummer, nice guy, and I think it gives a good solid basis to the album. And there's most of the bass on the album, I suppose I did keyboard wise, but there are, when Darryl came down, Nathan East came with him, and they were both playing fill at the time, and Nathan wanted to come down, and so I ended up using him in fact on about 4 tracks in the end, because I didn't really need any more guitar, because I got Jack, so it was sort of more Nathan. I ended up using Darryl in a way, and he ended up playing on, I think, Don't Turn Your Back on Me, and Something to Live For, which is the 7th line, and Charity Balls, and something else. Can't remember. But he played on 4 tracks, and it says on the credits. So. But I say most of the bass I did myself, and even on some of those tracks, some of the bass I kind of, you know, because when you're writing things, so often that comes with it. It depends if you want something what a bass player can give it sometimes, which sometimes you really do. Other times it's really just providing roots and a bit of rhythm and all the rest of it, and you can sort of do that yourself. And particularly since you get such good sound, my walls of sound, you know, got sort of sound that sounds a bit like a fretless bass and things. You know, it really, I mean, most people would, certainly uninitiated people, I think, would really think there was a bass player there. So, you know, I mean, I did struggle to try and play bass guitar back in the early days of solo albums, like on Curious Feeling, but you know, it just doesn't come naturally to me. Just trying to stop the other string vibrating at the same time, it's just too much for me. Very big thing, I've got very small hands, and this bass guitar is just so cumbersome. I had bits of foam, I don't know what foam stuff under it, trying to stop me doing it. Same with the lead guitar. And the other thing about this album actually is there's quite a lot of the guitar. What you think is lead guitar is actually keyboard. Because when I was doing the demos, I wanted, you know, I wanted guitar sounds, particularly on the demos, and then, you know, I wasn't sure who was going to play on the album or anything. So some of them I felt I was going to carry right through, and you know, there's guitar samples you get on some of these keyboards and things now are really good. And you know, I think there's a few times where you would sort of swear, but the guitar, smile, see, you know.
You wanted to be on it.
Yeah,
if I didn't do this, I'd be.
Indulge my ego.
Well, that's the question.
There's the guitar solos on, again, you don't know the song titles, but Never Let Me Know. You will know them, probably by the time you write the song, you may have heard a bit more, who knows. And, what's the other one? Particularly that one, and Something to Live For, I suppose. It sounds a bit more keyboardy, that one. And also Simply Incognito, there sounds like there's a lot of guitar all the way through that, and that is all keyboard, all the lead stuff.
I think that was probably one of the tracks that Carol played
Right.
snippet from. All of, I think she opted to play the piano instrumental at the beginning, so we probably wouldn't have noticed that. But
Right. Well, there is, as I said, there is a lot of guitar and which I do and things. So I have sort of, it's so really, in fact, most of it is done. There was really just the bulk of it is done by the three of us, which was Jack, John Robinson, and myself, and then the little additions from Nathan and from Daryl, which were sort of luxury. Well, not so much Daryl actually. The guitar wasn't, not the guitar solo, but the Nathan stuff was a bit of a luxury. I mean, I would have probably wouldn't have had to use it, but I'm very glad I did because I think he's great. Apart from that, he does great magic tricks. He's tremendous. He's got a marvellous sort of twinkle in his eye too. He's got his glass. He looks over, he sort of grins at you, the teeth flash. And he does this trick, and you're so busy watching his teeth, you don't see what he does with his hands. But no, it was good actually.
Did you actually record? You mentioned all the tracks that are actually on the album and the single. Did you record anything over and above that?
Oh yeah, there was one other song which will probably turn out as a sort of one of these extra tracks which compels people who really have to have everything to buy two versions. It's really unfair, but that's the way it is these days because singles sell so little, even big singles sell so little, and still unfortunately is the whole way of promoting the whole project that you have to try and maximise that, I suppose. But anyhow, there was a song which I wrote, in fact, which Nick Kershaw wrote the lyrics for. When I started this, I thought originally I would get Nick to write a couple of lyrics, and this was one of the ones that survived. It just ended up being the extra track. There's no particular reason. It's one that perhaps is most like I Want to Change the Score off the last album in some ways. But and it's probably I think it's slightly better than that. But because that was another of my favourite track. But it's sort of perhaps it's just I've done it before and I've done it. And it didn't really add much to anything. The other I did also put down two instrumental things. One which I intended to have vocals but never did, which is kind of sort of pretty thing in sort of 3/4. Sort of folky kind of thing, which might turn up just as an instrumental, I think, at some point. And then the other thing I put down was a more sort of orchestrated kind of piece, about 4 minutes, which relates more again to the Island in the Darkness, sort of the last track, more like that. But it's I decided to keep it back in there because I think it's a good theme, but probably a little bit wasted. You tuck it on an album like this, it just get a bit lost. And I think it's something if I ever get the chance to do some film stuff again, it's the sort of thing I would like to use. But at some point, I've got a lot of this kind of stuff over the years now, which at some point I'll have to just let it all out just to clean up the system. Actually, it's colonic irrigation, they call it.
You mentioned the CD singles there, where you can fix sort of a lot of tracks on different tracks. On your last album, you put sort of songs from Fugitive, This Is Love, Game on a single. Would it be at all possible ever to hear the remix of For a While, which surprisingly didn't appear on any of those, which
the remix
got available on vinyl, but
isn't it? Yeah. Well, as I say, the old Well, I don't. The remix of. Well, we remixed it. It was sort of done in the end by this guy. I don't honestly think it added very much to the song. I don't think it changed it very much. Have you heard? You got?
Oh yeah, I've got the vinyl.
I can't tell the difference. To
I
be
like
quite
it.
honest.
It's virtually the same apart from the heavy bass.
Yeah,
there's a bass pedal.
That's it.
Thing at the
Because
end.
the guy who was doing it, this guy Clive Crawley, who was involved with Charisma at that time, he really liked the album actually, but he really felt he could get something more of this. And he said he found this sort of bass pedal, so why aren't you using more of these? So he pushed them right up, which was good. The reason I didn't use it too much is on singles you kind of like the bass tends to sort of the third thing on radio, bass can often sort of take over and it makes the whole song sound quiet. But yeah, it's a possibility. I haven't really thought about it. I have to say I've forgotten it was a different mix actually. So it was a while ago. But the thing about the extra tracks is that it is a way sometimes of introducing people to some early material which they may not be aware of. I suppose that's one thing to use it for. The other thing there is on this one, because this song Only 17 lent itself obviously to this sort of treatment, there are a couple of sort of like sort of club mixes on it. One of which was quite funny this actually because we sent off the thing to a couple of people to do versions of it. And when I got the first guy did 2 versions, the second guy did 1 version. I got the first guy's first version, and it sort of seems to use so little of the track that I thought, well, you must get more. And the second version I heard of his used virtually none of the track, just a little bit. There's a spoken bit in the middle. He used that quite extensively. So I thought, well, okay, let's wait for the second guy, see what he comes up with. The second guy's tape came, and there is not a note on it that bears the slightest resemblance to anything on the track. Nothing at all. I thought, what is the point? I could have given him any song, and this was what he'd have turned up with. It's something he had on the shelf, and he just said it, so we didn't even pay him. It's ridiculous thing. Anyhow, so after that, we decided to do another version with Nick got enough, another guy, Chris Pickett, and Steve Pickett, that's it. And they did a sort of version which which used actually a lot of the elements in the song and a few other bits. So that's quite fun. So in fact on the first CD single, I think there's the two mix versions. One of which is one of the club mix versions, which is quite good. I mean, it's good in itself, although it doesn't have all that much to do with my song. And then there's the one that Nick did with this other guy, which has had quite a lot of relationship. And you've also got the proper version, and there's also the B-side of the single, the conventional B-side, which is the Certain Said. So and then if there's another CD single, it'll probably contain this Kershaw one, which is called Back to You. Although we may hold that back for the next single, depending on what happens, I suppose, with how much interest we get on radio interest and stuff. So that's then we may use one of the other, the 3/4 bit that's left over, instrumental piece I was talking about, might end up as a sort of B-side in the future, I suppose. And the other things, there are always possibilities of. I always quite fancy putting out this sort of full. I've got sort of 10, about 8 minutes, I think, version of what was the single, only 17, but before I edited it down. But of course that only exists in what you might call very sort of demo kind of form, but who knows, it might sound like
People go for things like that, because I mean Phil has released quite a few of his
I know he has,
original demos.
Yeah, but it's slightly different with him because he sort of sings, you know. And so it always sounds quite nice. In fact, some of his songs sound better when he's just doing the demo version, because he puts more sort of spirit into the voice before he's thought about it. But you know, so it's not quite the same as for just being an instrumental kind of thing. But I used to think it sounded pretty good on its own. But it's got a very kind of peculiar drum box on it. But then I could go back to the components and just make it sound a little prettier, perhaps. Or something like that.
Have the release dates been set yet for the album?
Well, everything keeps getting put back. So at the moment, as far as I know, I think it's pretty much definite now. The single is coming out on August the 29th. Everything's ready now, so it's all done, so they should be able to stick with that. And they want to put the album out, well, they're talking about 2 weeks after, but I think it should be left a little bit longer, just in case.
It's pretty quick after.
You do it
normally
too quick.
Normally about 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, I would like to leave it 3 or 4 weeks. The problem with leaving it too long, obviously, then you start getting into you get lost in sort of like everybody bringing out, the big guys bringing out their albums and stuff. It's difficult to find, you get a bit lost amongst everything else. But my feeling is if the single is sort of is getting any kind of response, and you want to leave it for as long as possible, because otherwise it always kills it on totally once the album comes out. It's like with Mike's thing, it's doing quite well as soon as the album comes out. The single goes. Doesn't stop them playing it, mind you. They're still playing it. I've never known a record gets much radio play. Don't know what he does. He must have some sort of magic.
How do you feel about the album? You think it? I mean, I know you've been bewildered, if you like, and us as fans as well, about the lack of success of your previous albums. You know, to be honest, we think they're worthy of more success, but for some reason it doesn't seem to. We interviewed Mike at Christmas, and he was quite confident about the new Mechanics album.
Yeah.
And he seems to have done quite well and they've toured well.
Well, I think one's always confident about the thing, I think. I mean, he was a little bit word of mouth purely because he'd had all that problems with the producer and stuff. Yeah. But in most cases, I think every time you finished a thing, if you're not happy with it, you wouldn't even consider putting it out. And I do feel very confident, but I would have probably said exactly the same after everything I've ever done. You know, so it's difficult to know. You think this time, I mean, it still sounds good to me. I listen to it now. It still sounds very good, you know, as far as I can sound. But I know what people are looking for different things in music, you know. And it's not just that. It's the fact is you've got to get through the kind of filter of the media, which is what the radio and the press, as a rule, tends to be very negative about anything that Genesis does, really, without exception. And unless you can sort of have some other reason for getting over that, you know, like Phil, just because he's so big, if you like, and the group itself, obviously, and then Mike, but perhaps because I think Mike has probably the best relationship with kind of the media, he just knows people, he's friendly with them, and the rest of it, so that kind of can help you through it. And radio always seems to like what he does. And right from the very first album, when he put out off Small Creeps Day, he put out Working in Line as a single, and that got so much radio play. It didn't sell, but the radio loved it, and he's always had radio play. And that's the main thing. Radio play won't sell something, but if you don't have radio play, you can't sell anything because no one knows it's out. So we just got to see what happens, and if we get radio play, then I think that will make a lot of difference. You know.
Is it true that the thing is going to be marketed packaged without your name on it? Because Carol Willis seemed to think that.
Led us to believe that.
I think just initially, what they want to do when they first put the thing out to radio, I think for a sort of week or two, is to not particularly say who it is. Not in the way that you kind of make out who's this, you know. At least I don't want to do that because I think that's it's not stupid really, because there's so what, But I think that just so that there's no particular prejudice, so that people might hear things and say that sounds really good, and rather than saying that there's another, Tony Banks solo project, and I think there's a lot of people who don't get very excited about that concept, and that tends to mean they don't even give the thing a listen really, or a fair listen. But no, once the single proper comes out, obviously it has names on it, so who it is, and the album obviously very much so. But the very first package for the single to radio is not saying who it is particularly, just saying as that's a new group. Whether this is a good idea or not, I don't know, but this is what the record company will do. It's something, in particular, I think originally, because when the thing was called Strictly Incognito, it made a lot of sense. When it's called Strictly Inc, but since it's sort of short for, it depends what you think Inc is short for. Incorporated probably, but incomprehensible maybe. It's whatever you want. I think it's it looks quite nice in print actually when you see it. It's Strictly Inc. 2017 actually looks quite. You think, wow, you'd want it. I think you sort of think it's worth listening to. We've done a sort of radio edit, cut the song down so that it's sort of just about 4 minutes, because it's actually about 4:55 the song actually. It doesn't. It's pretty much okay. The main thing you lose is the introduction, which is quite a long introduction for a single, to be honest. But
Let's try and get some airplay on LMFM. They never tell you who it is, do they? Just play songs and they never say who it is, so you'll be fine on this.
yes.
Yeah, it's the opposite way. You hear a good song and you think, oh, who's that? They don't tell you.
Yeah, I find that very irritating actually.
And it's right what you said about Mike. The two singles of his regular album, the title track and the first one, Over My Shoulder, just played to death.
Simon Mayo made an effort to play it every day of the week the first week it came out.
It's commercial radio. I don't know all this stuff. Things get promoted, but they literally played every couple of hours or so.
It was played a lot. It was. At one point it was. I'm not sure it was the best, most played out song in the country. It was certainly in the top 3 for 3 or 4 weeks, I think, and quite unbelievable, really. Given all that, because sales as a consequence perhaps were a little disappointing. Because the single did okay, but the album's done pretty good. But it's not like it's. You might hope for more, I suppose. That's the problem. You get that thing as well, but you can't say he hasn't been given a chance. He's had that, and the second single got played a fair amount. But they couldn't really they kept having to hold the second single back because the first single was getting so much play. I'd love that problem. What a great problem.
I think you said it before though. It's just sheer luck.
It is luck, but his stuff is very radio friendly. That song, it's sort of thing that they like to play. It's very simple. It kind of it's that sort of thing. It's always more difficult when the thing's a little bit more kind of challenging, I suppose, to know. Then you've just got to find. You've then got to have someone who's on your side, and then you've got to have people who are prepared to think it's worth having on their side. It's not. I don't think it's that exciting for someone to get behind somebody who's been around a bit. It just isn't so exciting for them. If it's a new band they've never heard of before, then it's exciting. But if it's someone who's been around and just happens to, I don't think it's of that much interest. Although maybe it's coming around a bit. There are some people who might still, if Ray Davies say, put out a song that he thought was interesting. I think that would get a lot of people behind it. So it's who you are a bit. Whereas if it's sort of Justin Hayward, they probably wouldn't. It's just image, and unfortunately, I think I fall probably somewhere in between those two, but probably too close to the Justin Hayward end to attract the interest. Jack Hughes, on the other hand, you see, he's probably got a little bit more of a sort of interesting image because Wang Chung sort of remembers it and remembers liking it to some extent. Whatever it is, what happened to him, But even so, you just don't know how far that will go. So I think that the initial thing is the idea of promoting it without any particular name, is to try and sort of see if anyone sort of just picks up on it as a sort of just as a song. And if that doesn't work, then you kind of think you sort of emphasise the duo name, because the group we're calling ourselves Strictly Inc, right? And that'll be the two of us, just myself and Jack. I think John is a sort of session drummer. Playing Barbara Streisand around, I think. So that's how it stands.
When you come to covers for these things, will it be a photograph, or has there been a cover designed, or?
Well, what actually we've done is I've used images for both this single and the album. I've used things that have come out of the video. Now the video is a combination of animation, drawn animation and computer animation, and the things we used on the cover of the single is just basically a still from the video, which is a combination of drawn and computer, which is a sort of dancing sort of And then the album cover they uses a couple of sort of rather insane looking characters that this guy drew for the thing. Now I mean it's a pretty sort of it's quite a bizarre cover. I mean it's two faces as you might say. But I think going with the title Strictly Ink and everything again, it's really in disguise stuff. You know, there's one sort of, and I think it's quite striking. Now whether you like it or not, I don't know. I mean it's more sort of in the realms of Duke type cover, if you like.
Who is the artist who's done the?
His name's a guy called John, but I can't remember what his surname is actually. But he was the guy who did the actual drawn animation for the video. And this was he just drew because the idea is when this girl is in a sort of dark world, that she's sort of surrounded by all these kind of dubious characters, and he just drew about 10 dubious characters, and I thought they all looked fantastic. So we picked out two that I liked the best, and one sort of mean-looking, thin-faced character, and the other's a sort of like a female kind of with a great big mouth, you know. And it just looks quite sort of fun, I think. I mean, it's just arresting. I don't think it necessarily relates particularly to everything on the album, but it's sort of it's got quite a. I just think you'll remember it if you see it. So even if you think that's crap, you'll think. You
remember it one way or the other.
Yeah, one way or the other, you'll remember it. You know, CDs because they're so small, you kind of need to make certain that it is fairly powerful. And I just wanted to try and avoid. They were trying to steer me towards using a photographic thing of Jack Hagen. I've done it before. Every time I get steered towards it, and I came across my old designs which I went through with a guy for both The Fugitive and for Still, and the old designs are so much better, I think. I mean, I don't like pictures of myself, obviously, but I thought The Fugitive was a really bad album cover at the time, and it was just they wanted to sort of get me on it, you know, in one way or another. I found an old one which was much more the idea that The Fugitive sort of conjured up at the time, which was a sort of vanishing point little figure running in the distance. Okay, it might be cliche, but it really looked good, you know. I had a picture like that, and it, you know, I just think it's a real shame we didn't use it. So at this time I decided, at one point I've chosen these things, and everyone was very enthusiastic about these things, and then suddenly the pictures came, and I was like, oh, you should use this, you know. I found myself being pulled towards it, and I finally said, no, let's just go with the thing. And everyone, actually, in the end, I think people, apart from a couple of people at Virgin, most people were in favour of using this, because it's just more striking, and it lends itself to, you know, posters and marketing and that sort of stuff as well, so I think. So that's what you got. Got a couple of silly faces.
You've had Nick in again producing.
Nick, yes. Well, Nick and I have a good relationship actually. It's sort of he's very very supportive and very enthusiastic. He really likes this sort of stuff. He really wants it to do well, you know, and he tries really hard. And having worked with him obviously on Still and then on We Can't Dance, you know, I think they have a very good working relationship, sort of working towards the same thing, you know, and we know exactly what we can say to each other and not and stuff. You know, he always tries to take a chord out of me somewhere here or there, you know. I don't really do much in the realm of what you might call real production in that sense, I suppose. But in terms of the sound, you know, I can pretty much, I could or I don't, just leave him really to do it and just criticise at the end, you know, just little points. But no, we work quite well, I think, in doing things, and also when choosing vocals and stuff, you know, do all that together and stuff. So we just work well together, I suppose.
I think it was Andrew who remarked that until obviously these two albums, you've always had a different producer. Is that basically because you've never found one that you've been...
Well, no one wants to work with me again. Well, I think a little bit with down at Eras. I mean, obviously I did The Curious Feeling with Dave Henschel, I suppose, because he was our current producer at the time, and I just needed someone who I could rely on. As it transpired, because Dave actually had mumps when I did that album, the first month, and so I actually ended up doing it with Dave Bascom, of course, who later became quite a well-known engineer in his own right, but he was at that time just a tape artist. He and I did most of the early stuff. We did all the basic recording together, and then Dave came. The problem was that Dave was also doing Mike's album, and it became a little bit of a funny thing, actually, because I think I thought Dave's sort of preference was a bit for Mike's album and stuff, so it was a sort of a slightly strange feeling at the time, really. So, but yeah, by the time we got on to doing The Fugitive, I mean, Dave was sort of history, I suppose, and Steve Short was someone who I'd worked with before at Trident, and he was suggested, I suppose, as a possibility. It's a difficult thing, really, because with solo projects, it's not necessarily the people who are. It depends. Sometimes big time people don't want to know, and then sometimes, I mean, I can't remember who actually. Also, I approached. I only really wanted to work with an engineer. The only time I ever went against that was with Bankstep when Steve Hittigan, who was supposed to be kind of the producer, but even that didn't really work, and it ended up being a co-production because I can't shut up. And I don't really think anyone else particularly knows they don't have no more idea what they want, what I want out of it than I do. You know what I mean?
Well, if you're actually creating the thing, then you've got.
Well,
the
that's
best
right. But
idea of how it should
sometimes
sound.
there's no doubt that sometimes producers can do things. I mean, if you look at Peter's albums, he's always kind of used sort of people and different people and stuff. And I think they're quite good at sort of containing him a bit, and sort of chopping him around. You know, I certainly up to and including so anyhow. That the sort of the choices that were made, I think, were good ones. You know, by the people he worked with. And you sort of need that. I don't think that's a bad thing if you can find the people. And I have a bit of that with Nick. There's something about it. He definitely sort of hones me into shape slightly. Because within the group, I think, you see, I'm definitely getting sort of honed into shape, particularly by Mike. Because he's naturally, as you can tell from the solo albums, really, I mean, he's obviously a much more simple and straight ahead kind of approach to things. But he likes the other stuff. But it's a question of, and I, of course, sort of tend to be too kind of flowery and stuff. So together we kind of work quite well because he sort of, you know, sort of channels me a bit more, you know, and sort of acts in a sense of a production role, I think, within the writing. Yes, I suppose it is just different people. Has proved to be different people. There's no particular reason for that actually. But no, well, you know, I would have perhaps, might have worked with Hugh when we did when I done Bank Statement, but he was actually involved. He was working with Sting or something like that. So it was not practical. Yeah, so he was not available really, even if people wanted to use him. He was also getting quite sort of big time, really, I suppose.
Can I use the toilet?
You can indeed. Yeah, where it is.
Kitchen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you could do a favour, Richard, if you could bring the other accoutrements in as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Right. What? All of it.
Well, certainly mine, because we are almost concluded. I think that's concluded the bit about the new album as far as we can.
Yeah, that's right.
You just push or?
Yeah, just push it.
There's just a couple of questions now that I hesitate to ask them, but basically, if I don't, I'll get ear bashed by the readers and everything else. It's about, well, the one last thing is when we last spoke to you, you did mention that you were trying to get, or considering some more work in either films or TV. Did anything ever eventuate out of?
Well, I'm still trying really. If there's some possible film that maybe may happen in the autumn, it's sort of nothing really has sort of particularly come up. I suppose, to be honest, I haven't, because of the working on the album and everything. I think everyone's kind of waiting a little bit just to sort of see this, you know, go past. And when it does, you know, and then see what happens after that. Because I mean, either it might make that easier, or it might make no difference. But once it's out of the way, then I suppose I focus on it. And I know it's just terribly difficult. I don't know. Well, I do know why. Actually, it's very close shop. Actually, once you're in there, it's easy, but it's quite difficult to get in there. And it hasn't really sort of seemed to happen. But it hasn't worried me at the moment because I've been doing this. But obviously, if I'm doing nothing else, then I'll worry more and probably irritate some people enough to make them let me do something.
And of course, we have heard various bits and pieces about the proposed box set, or box sets plural. What stage are things at with those?
Well, we're getting on quite far, really. I mean, I can give you some idea of what's on it. It's basically, I just have 4 CDs, which will probably be ending up being 2, will probably be a live version of Land My Stand, taken from, which is the Shrine version, which is the bootleg version people have, but this is, we've got the multi-tracks, so we've been able to start again. And we've also, some of the vocals had to be redone, which is quite interesting actually, because some of the redone vocals are really good. When it's a sort of depressing sort of bit, Pete sings it really well nowadays. He's obviously a very depressed sort of person, because things like, some of the things like Lamia and In the Rapids and stuff sound really good. And then, you know, because you've got modern production, it actually sounds good. Now the only thing that's missing, of course, from the Shrine version, because everyone was, people operating the tape recorders were too drunk, I suppose. We had 2 machines, and the whole idea was to overlap them. In fact, they virtually overlap each other, and we're only lucky that we've got had counting out time, because one the tape lasted longer than the other. But what happens is they both run out on In the Rapids, so we haven't got it. So what we've done with it is, in fact, we've gone back to the album version, redone the vocals, and done a completely, you know, remixed it, like it sort of thing. But of course, what's terrible about doing that is it just sounds so good, and you think to yourself, you know, if one could just remix all those old albums, you know, how good they might sound. But then a lot of people wouldn't like it because they say, well, you've missed out that bit, you've done that bit. But it just, you can get, you know, whereas, I mean, when we mixed it at the time, it was just like, you know, it was right at the 11th hour, and we sort of did as fast as we could. And we weren't really satisfied with it. We had no more time. We ran out of everything. The album should have been out about a month before and everything. And it was a very quickly done thing. But you know, you can, with modern techniques, you've got the chance to get it right. You can get body and sound and acoustic sound really good. Just sounds great.
So it's the whole of the lamb then that you put on this box set?
The whole of the Outland is two CDs, the live version of the Outland, including sort of stories and all the rest of it. And you get some of the bits are, you know, it's good. All the improvised bits tend to sort of are a bit different from the album actually. It's some songs sound really good because there's only one version there. You obviously don't necessarily get as good a version of everything as you could get. But having listened to most of it now, I would say that you know, pretty much. I mean, the first side stuff is really good. Like Lamb right through to. I think Lamb right through as far as certainly Counting Out Time is good. So that's quite a lot, you know. And then there's a bit of a lapse in one or two of the middle ones. I mean, I think. Well, it depends what tracks, you know. I think Anyway would have a very good live. There's some of them. And it gets good towards the end. Slipper Man sounds really good. We had to redo the vocals on that completely, obviously, because you're wearing a stupid mask. You can get the microphone anywhere near the face, so there's nothing on the tape, you know, apart from sort of hi-hat. You know, so I think it's basically, I think for anyone, obviously, I think for fans, it'll sound really, you know, interesting. And the other things we've also third CD, if you like. I mean, I don't know if this quite has going to divide up. This is the thing. We got lots of other live stuff from the period, because also we only ever did the one live album with Peter, because all this stuff is just the stuff with Peter, this first box set, and includes things like Moonlit Night stuff. There's a nice version of More Fool Me actually, with Phil singing, and a few bits and pieces like that. And then the other one is Supper's Ready, of course, which doesn't exist with Pete singing, and we're not using the version that there was a version done at the same time as the Genesis live album, which is not very good. But there's about 2 or 3 other versions of it. We've selected one that sounds pretty good. So hopefully that will be the one we use. A couple of corrections will be done. And
where was that one taken from?
I can't remember. I think it might have been a Rainbow concert actually. Probably, I think it was a Rainbow concert done in '73 or something. I've heard that a version we've done, Dance in the Moon at Night, is really good. I think it's better than the album version. But in the main, I'm not a great fan of live stuff myself. I hear all the imperfections, you know. And then the last one, which will probably be more than one album's worth, but this is probably the most interesting stuff, which is the demos and the B-sides and stuff, again, only up to the era with Peter singing. But we got quite a large selection of stuff some of it's pre-Genesis Revelation, and then some of it was done between Genesis Revelation and Trespass. There's a lot of stuff we haven't been able to locate. We've looked around and we just haven't found it. So, you know, there's missing bits and pieces we'd really like to have. But we're going to go through, in fact, next week. I'm going to go through with Nick the early stuff and see what's really usable. And, you know, perhaps some things we might just use a bit rather than a whole lot. You know, I mean, I know some people would say they'd like to just hear the whole lot as it is, but some of it is pretty rough, you know, kind of verbate kind of. It is many years ago, and some of it was done very, very quickly, and it's not really quite so good. But some of it's quite fun, and you know, because it includes 1 or 2 things that which weren't demos as well. There's 1 or 2 which were done for there's the Night Ride tape, which I think you probably know of. Which there's obviously a few tracks on that which have never appeared elsewhere. Again, we'll use those. We'll be able to at least go back to the original masters, but again they're mixed masters, so we can't do much with any of these things. They're all pre-mixed, which is a slight problem, because you can make them sound much better and you can clean them up and everything, which you in the same ways we did with the albums, you know, if you like. And you're starting off with properly. You can probably make a bigger improvement because the versions, certainly the bootleg versions I've heard of, some of those things are pretty bad. But you can't remix them in the way you can with the live stuff, you know, which obviously sounds a lot better. Yeah, that's how it stands at the moment, and. So it's 4 CDs and.
Well, Carol did mention it, didn't she, the other day? We were looking at perhaps you know, before Christmas release, but I think you said you seem to be the main voice behind this, and I mean getting it.
Well, only because.
And
Well,
you'd rather be late till the new year.
Phil's in Switzerland and Pete's in Bath, and Nick's basically been doing most of it, and I've been kind of acting as his sort of main link with everybody, and also come and listen to lots of stuff. Yeah, I mean, someone has to kind of keep some sort of eye on But
you're not rushing to get it out, you know. You
well,
seem to want to get it
no,
right
but we
and
have
get it
actually,
perfect.
we're probably getting closer, because the one thing that was holding us up a bit before was the artwork, because obviously it's going to include a lot of stuff, 72-page booklet, there's a lot of stuff in it. So there's a lot of, there's going to be articles by one or two people like Chris Watch and a few other people and things like that, and a lot of pictures, and a lot of, you know, usual sort of stuff, you know, sort of articles and ads, and yeah, that's it. Hopefully some which hasn't been seen before. It's not, you know, it's not going to be just duplicate of Amanda's book or anything. We'll have a lot of other stuff in. And that looks pretty good. I mean, we finally got that sort of sorted out the other day, and sort of roughly what's going in it. And still been quite excited on the verbiage, you know, what's going to be written. But it's so that's normally what takes the time. If we got all that sorted out, music, the lamb is pretty much done. There's got to be put together and sort of usual stuff. A lot of the other live stuff is the stuff we really haven't looked at all yet is the demo stuff, which is what we're going to start next week. But that won't take all that long. So it could come out before Christmas, you know. But it's
Well, Carol did say Christmas, but she didn't say what year.
yeah, that's right. Well, the idea was we've got 3 of these things to do. You know, so the second one.
What prompted this upset looking like
The record
this
company
at one
prompted
time?
it,
Yeah.
actually.
Sorry?
The record
want to do
company.
it now,
prompted it. I had really no interest in it at all to begin with. Really, the only thing I thought would be nice would have been put out as just an album which included all the things which had never appeared on a real album. You know, all the B-sides and things and all this stuff. But you know, they just felt that people would like this. And once we started looking to see what we got, particularly the absence of live material from the time when people said was an obvious thing to kind of to rectify. You know, once you get to the next year, you see a lot of the stuff. There will be probably well, there's certainly quite a lot more material, which is just A-sides and B-sides and all the rest of it. I mean, at the last count, I mean, when I added all that up, what we had right the way through the whole period, it's nearly 2 hours worth of stuff actually. That's a lot of
just on the
material.
B-sides.
That was just really on B-sides. They do
tracks.
mount up, you know, because it was about 3 or 4 per album, plus, you know, a few other bits and pieces. And then, so this next lot could be the bias towards that could be a bit higher, I think, on the next 2 CDs, next 2 compilations. There's the other thing there are obviously which we could use, which we've got more and more of as time goes by, is the sort of like the rehearsal type stuff, which we've got an awful lot of. But I know it's going to be better to sort of, you know, sift through it and see what we've actually got. But there's 1 or 2 things that might be good. They obviously do exist actually for this era too. There's some quite, you know, we used to have the cassette running when we right from certainly from the John England kind of rehearsals, and perhaps even from before. But since then, you know, there's always been things on. And
Well, that'd be interesting. I recall Phil saying on 3 Sides Live video about, you know, you were mixing Abacab and the track itself, Abacab. You know, you had to say, well, we've got to pick a mix here. And he said you'd
Not
recorded
mixes.
various mixes of.
well, there were various versions
Okay.
actually, and some of those things could be interesting. That's something we will look at, because something like Home by the Sea that was there's 2 tapes of improvisations which that was taken from, and you know, because we just selected bits and learned what we'd done. Mike and I just sat through and just worked out exactly what we'd done, you know, and just put these bits together in an order, you know. But some of the stuff in between was quite good too, you know. But it's just, you know, there's a lot of bum notes as well. That's the trouble. Let's see how much of that you can live with.
What about the original Abacab sessions? There was an album recorded of stuff that you scrapped because it sounded too, not cliche, but like Duke, I suppose. Did any of that survive, or was it just completely scrapped? And
Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I think you've got.
on Abacab, you heard that sort of a lot of songs were written, but they started sounding
Well, we wrote
too much.
Well, we wrote other things,
Like
but
your older-
anything that got onto most of the stuff that got onto tape ended up being released, and plus the B-sides like Army 9 and all that.
Submarinians.
But there wasn't much else. But I mean, you know, there would have been stuff on the demos. We had 2 or 3, you know, quite a few other things that 1 or 2 other songs that never got past the sort of just being on the, you know, which would probably exist on the cassettes, and obviously loads of little bits, improvisations and things. Some of those are good, you know, because it's often the problem when you've got some 20 minutes of stuff which sounds all right, but you can't sort of select anything out of it to sort of particularly make a thing of. Obviously, particularly with pieces like what you might call extended sort of typical Genesis bits like the Last Domino, things like that. There's, you know, I mean, we had tapes and tapes of improvisations on that. You know, of course, one of which was Invisible Touch, which was actually part of that improvisation, which was selected out and made a song on its own. You know, so you kind of, you know, there are some quite interesting things there. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff. At the moment, it's all locked in Phil's Phil's basement at his house, and his wife, his ex-wife or whatever she is at the moment, won't kind of let him near it. So we're trying to work on that one. That's a sort of interesting little side problem we have. But I think by the time it comes, we will.
Some of the seconds outtakes, will that be?
Well, when we get there, but seconds out, you see that by that time we were recording every tour, probably 2 or 3 shows a tour. So we've got lots of other stuff, and so the second out stuff, which because it was 2 tapes and everything, so we used pretty much most of the best stuff off that. But from other periods, because obviously things like In the Cage in particular, all those bits that came after it sort of changed every tour. We did different things. And I can't remember.
This is one of the main things that people they usually ask me is if that live material is muted, what most of them seem to prefer is for if you like the tracks that were in the set from each particular year that didn't end up on 3 Sides Live.
Well, that's right. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do with the obviously we're doing Peter's things. We're not including any of the tracks that are on Genesis Live. There's no point really, although we've got better versions of them around, to be honest. But they're sort of there and taken care of. But later on, yes, there's a lot of stuff that isn't.
In the Cage through to Supper's Ready medley of '86 would be there.
Was that one? There's also the one that involved a bit of I don't know which one actually. I don't know which one ended up at 1 seconds out. I can't remember. But in that Quiet Earth stuff, that wasn't on that, was it?
No,
it didn't end.
Because that was always quite good live. Actually, that's a good bit. But I don't know. And there's lots of songs that I know there are things like All the Mouse's Night and things. I come across it at some point. There were various live songs that never did anything. And also, live is much better catered for after that. Like 1 or 2 versions of songs that obviously didn't end up anywhere else. But most of the songs we ever played live are there somewhere. Some of them, of course, we've actually ended up using as B-sides. So there was a version of, I think we ended up with that version of In Too Deep, for example. There was a live version of that.
Since the
B-side, the releasing
the string section, Duro's Special Way as well.
That's right. Yeah. So they've sort of been, but they're the kind of things obviously would turn up again because and whether some of those might be tempted to remix. So it really depends on what they sound like. Because live stuff is often done very fast. There was a live version of Further Fifth was a B-side someplace, I remember, which basically Mike and I just did, at one point, because we needed a B-side and we found the version of Further Fifth and did it, So it's like kind of, some of those were done very fast. They might not be. We won't use all the B-sides. The ones that are just live things, we will look probably for the best we can find of those songs. But we will use all the B-sides of recorded material and stuff. But there are 1 or 2 other bits and pieces that matter.
Because obviously there are an awful lot of people that didn't get them, so to round them all up into one package will make a lot of people.
Well, that's it. Well, I kind of wanted them. That's why I thought rather than people having to buy 4, or 3 box sets, which is going to set them back probably about quite a lot. I don't know if anyone does that on the price yet.
40 quid each.
Yeah, you're talking about 120 quid. Which some people will be very happy for everything else that appears. And I know they will, but not. But there is a sort of person who's a little more casual who would have just liked perhaps have had would have probably been one double CD. About 20 quid or something, 25 quid, of all the unreleased kind of studio material, which is sort of what you might call the main things, They're the main stuff that we would like people to hear, because there's virtually very few cases where what we left off we really felt was considerably weaker than what we put on. It was very much a case of choosing what balanced the album. And I've told you before, I think particularly when in Wuthering, we left off with 3 simpler tracks. Or at least 2 of the simpler tracks, and I didn't feel good about that afterwards. Really, it gave the album slightly the wrong kind of emphasis. So it'd be nice to
Well, at least you said it would be a lot of money to get the 3 box sets, but I don't think there's definitely not coming out together.
No.
I think it'll be quite some months apart. Putting
Well,
together.
originally I
So
thought
that
that the rest of the stuff was going to be a bit of filler material, because when they first suggested this idea, some guy came up with the suggestion that we should just put all these things out and just find a different version of every song. And it just sort of seemed a bit it just seemed so contrived. I just thought there had to be a reason for it. And once we focused on this album, we realised that we did have these live takes of the Lamb. It just seemed a very logical thing to do. Once we listened to them and realised they actually didn't sound too bad. We needed very little repair work actually from the rest of us, and it was mainly vocal, a few little bits and pieces, but not much actually. And there's one interesting moment on the guitar which you can spot if it actually survives through. And Steve may come and do the bit again, I suppose, but there's one little bit which is fun if you know. It's worth listening for.
You can see the joy.
Yeah, well, you'll know the joy if you know what to look for. You're probably one of those things that comes in a blinding flash. Why? But anyhow, it's.
I think that's.
Can I just ask, when you mention all the live things, just to turn it round a little bit, have you ever considered playing live yourself for your albums? Or
Well,
is it-
I've considered it, but it's very difficult.
Because in my opinion, I think, I don't know, it may have helped promote your albums.
Yes, I
that's
think
the
you're probably
point
right.
of
But
touring.
it's these things work. It works both ways. That's the trouble. You kind of, you could probably, one couldn't really do very many shows, right? Without. If the album's a success, then you can do it. It's one or the other. What comes first, you know? Because then people want to see you, and you can get people, and you've got songs to build to in the sets and everything, you know. Whereas if you're just doing it, it's you've really got to be prepared to start very. You've really got to do a lot of coverage. I mean, you're talking about a lot of shows. It's not just you know. Whereas I probably could play a venue sort of a reasonable size in one or two places, you know, but not overall. You couldn't over the whole country or anything. Certainly not abroad. It would be very difficult, I think. You know. But I mean, I like the idea of it. I mean, some of these things would sound great. None about it, but it's
A couple of one-off shows, maybe.
yeah. But the one-off shows you see that are no good because it's always the first show or two are the ones that
Yeah.
you kind of get in the wheels
I
working.
suppose it's a lot of rehearsing for such a
That's
little-
right. It's a very difficult thing. And then you think, do you go for it? You have to go for it properly. I think, you know, you have to do a proper show, and if otherwise it comes across as sort of being a bit low-key and tacky. And the nature of the kind of things I do and everything, it would need presentation, you know, because it lends itself to that.
Yeah.
Not quite the same extravagance as in terms of shows, I don't think. But
But
more
unlike
so
Mike's.
than Mike's, because Mike went for it, and I think it suits his music. Because music is very kind of, it's very straight ahead music, from Mike. And he kind of gone for a very straight ahead show this time.
That was the surprise compared to the '89 tour.
Yeah.
Was
Well,
the
you
fact that
see,
it
I
was
think some of
releasing.
the more atmospheric songs don't work so well in that situation. Things like sort of Silent Running, The Living Years and stuff, where it's sort of they're a little bit, they come across very straightforward. Whereas, you know, with a bit of atmosphere creation, those songs sound great. Whereas in a show like this, it's more the up songs like Over My Shoulder or Word of Mouth that sound good. You know,
Yeah.
it's just sort of straight ahead. You don't sort of, you don't have to, don't need much help really. And I think he just went consciously for that. He wanted it to be simple, transportable, you know, and all the rest of it, so he could just do it anywhere rather than have to sort
Well,
of
he did
worry
say
about
to us, he said, I think we'll call this tour Have Backline Will Travel.
it.
And I think he
that's
did
it.
that this
He
time.
did it
Yeah,
with
Paul
Estonia at
Carrick,
one
yeah.
point, you know, it's just a pretty peculiar place to end up.
Paul Carrick referred to his van, Mike's van.
Yeah.
Go in the back
yeah.
of the van, then
Yeah, well,
the
it's
van
certainly,
and
I
the
couldn't, when I was
helicopter.
I was seeing him in Brighton, and I couldn't believe that, you know, just in the time I was sort of sitting there waiting to go backstage, that the whole thing had been dismantled, you know.
Yeah.
This is fantastic, you know.
yeah.
Roadies must love it.
You were spotted at Brighton because there were around about 15 or 20 of our readers there.
Oh, really?
Quite
Yeah,
a few of
well,
them
a
did
couple
see
of guys
you.
came up.
Yeah. Oh, but I know one of them was as well.
It's
bound to be him.
yeah, Brighton's got a meaning of it, yeah. Well,
Tony, can I ask a slight favour? My review is complete, but would you be able to take a photograph, or be able to take a photograph of you behind a keyboard, or as a posed? If you can find one.
Spot the keyboard.
the only thing you'll be able to find is probably a piano. I don't think there's anything else around, actually.
Well,
if it's, I don't know where it is
Whatever,
though.
that'll do.
Uses piano. Yes, and goes.
Well, that
Well, there is-
concludes the
Alright.
formal bit.
Yeah.